My name is Ryan Snelling, and welcome to my watch diary. This is the 5th time I've recorded this intro. It's a little nostalgic because this used to happen to me all the time on previous podcasts. I've been listening to a lot of old episodes that I did, whether Sight and Sound, Film Beef, all the podcasts that I used to do, even some of the Collider Afterthoughts and the After Schmo podcasts I've been listening to. There were so many times where I'd start and I'd intro the show with, hey, this is the 5th time I've done this intro. Sometimes you're just, I don't know, you have to find the mood, you have to find the tone, you have to turn yourself on. And I guess I haven't done that yet. Look, so if you watch this on the YouTube channel, whenever I introduce the trusty Trent to cold brew, it's mostly full. You witness one of my first 5 drinks, usually on air, but it's halfway full if you're watching this right now. I've hit record 4 or 5 times. Some of those takes last, 30 seconds. But the one that just ended, I'd probably been talking for about 10 minutes before I looked down and saw that it wasn't recording at all. So, in a way, I've done more takes than I've recorded, I guess. Anyway, it's a mess of a morning, but it's all good. I'm starting later than usual. It's 11 a.m. I'm about 3 hours late, but it's all good. I'm excited to be here. Not as excited as I was about 30 minutes ago when I started recording, but I am excited. I always am, because I get to look at myself while podcasting. I've never been able to do this before. It's new to me. I dig it. I'm right in front of myself, just staring at myself. I'm a narcissist. I love the setup. I love what I'm doing right now. And I love you for watching and listening to everything I'm doing on the Watch Diary podcast feed and YouTube channel. So I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping real quick, and then we'll get it out of the way. I think this episode is going to be shorter than usual. If you haven't, definitely check out last week's episode. But it was an hour 45. And it had mostly to do with the fact that I ranked everything in the MCU. And it was a lot of fun. I'm going to be doing a lot of that today here, but we'll get to that here in a minute. So if you're listening to this on the Watch Diary podcast feed, thank you. Go to the description of this go to the description of this podcast and subscribe to the Rewatch Ryan YouTube channel. I put a lot of this content up in bite-sized videos. I love that idea. I've always wanted to do that. And look, if you like the Watch Diary content, then you're going to like the Rewatch Ryan content, because it's a lot of the same stuff, but also there's going to be exclusives on the YouTube channel. So definitely go check it out if you haven't already. It would really, really mean a lot to me. I think there's a lot of dedicated listeners that already subscribe, like the Jeremy Grays and the Ben Brassos and the Kevin Marks and the Robbie Smiths and all those people who tweet at me and message me throughout the week about the content. I appreciate it, but we got to get these other Watch Diary listeners to subscribe, because here's the thing about the YouTube channel. I just rebranded it as Rewatch Ryan, but that YouTube channel has existed since 2016, when myself and Jay Williams started Sight and Sound. That's where we made our content, and it was mostly music, and it was mostly hosted by Jay, and now that it's movies, and now that it's me, some of the subscribers aren't really enjoying it. So I'm losing subscribers more than I'm getting them right now, but it's okay though. It's just a natural thing. I'll bounce back, but it would help me out, and it would boost me out. It would boost me out if you went over there and subscribed, because there are a lot more listeners on the Watch Diary podcast feed than there are viewers of Rewatch Ryan. So it would mean a lot to me, and I'd appreciate it. And please like the videos too. So the segmented videos, I have Never Before Seen. I have Every Movie Ever. This week's podcast is going to be comprised of 3 Every Movie Ever segments. The concept and the idea, and if you've seen the title of the video or the podcast, you already know what it is. Essentially, in honor of Star Wars Celebration coming up in 10 days or so, in honor of it being Star Wars month, I guess, because May the 4th and Celebration and Obi-Wan, May, summer movies, all that kind of stuff. In honor of Star Wars month, I am retconning every top 10 list I ever made that included a Disney Star Wars film. That's right. So we're going to go over 2015, 2016, and 2017. Because in the Disney Star Wars era, those are the 3 years where I included a Star Wars film in my top 10 list. And I have since taken Star Wars off all three lists. And I'm going to reveal my top 10 movies of 2015, 2016, and 2017 without a Star Wars movie on this podcast. And I'm so excited. Is it so disrespectful? Yes. Is it funny to me? Yes. Did I ever imagine in my life that I'd become a guy who hates on Star Wars on YouTube? And no, I did it. And I'm going to dive into that. So just make sure you stay tuned. And if you are a diehard Star Wars fan, I'm not gonna be a shithead. Like, maybe I will be a little bit, but there's a reason for it, and I'm not gonna be one of the insufferable Star Wars fans that hate it. Like, fans, I guess, the insufferable people that complain about Star Wars. I'm gonna be very diplomatic and very reasonable. I can be someone who doesn't like those movies without actually caring enough to like hate on the movies. But honestly, like, look, if we have a discourse about how our opinions and how our views change over time, this is what this is actually categorized as, and I'm gonna make fun of it and I'm gonna heighten it because it is funny to me that I'm doing this just to take Star Wars movies out of my top 10s. But no, seriously, this does have a lot to do with the fact that opinions and views just change over time. And this week, I've listened to a lot of my old podcasts. I've had a lot of them. I've been podcasting since 2014, 8 years. And if I remember correctly, there were some podcasts that like just didn't last long at all. Like, I started as projects and then they were just kind of abandoned. And maybe they weren't really like my main squeeze, if you will. But right now, if I could like think of all the podcasts I came up with, Film Beef, which I did with 2 years with my friend Phil. Then we did a TV centric podcast called Death to DVR, which was a lot of fun. Sight and Sound. I think there were a couple of episodes of like a show called Weekly Catch Up, but that ended up being a Rotten Tomatoes podcast, so we abandoned that. If you want to get into all the Schmoes Know stuff, Schmoville, After Schmo, Collider Afterthoughts. I think I'm missing one of them. Schmoes Know, After Schmo, Schmoville. I feel like there's another one in there. Collider Afterthoughts, Watch Diary. Before Watch Diary, it was Movie House. Before Movie House, I did the Schmoes Know podcast feed. Like, this is the Schmoes Know podcast feed that you're listening to right now. I've done a lot, and I've listened to a lot of episodes. Some of them included these conversations about Star Wars. Some of them in general, though, were just like really fucking hilarious to listen to because my takes were like so off and like so outdated. And, but anybody can say that about any content they've ever created, but it was just funny, and I've gotten a kick out of it. And I've just been super reflective lately, super retrospective, and I'm blaming Everything Everywhere All at Once 100%. Because if there was any lesson that Star Wars taught us that was valuable to me, is let the past die. And I probably should, but it's actually helped me quite a bit. I understand what let the past die means, or I know what it means to me anyway. But looking back has actually been super helpful, because I've been able to look back at behaviors that I like disagree with now, and have come to like really feel and understand and learn how I've grown as a person. And it's just something I kind of appreciate. And it really was that movie, Everything Everywhere All at Once, which, by the way, is a movie that continues to get brought up in my daily life at work. I talk all the time about my workplace and the fact that there are so many people there who like watch movies but aren't into movies, but they all have seen Everything Everywhere All at Once. And it's entirely about word of mouth. Someone told me that they've already seen it twice because they had to take someone that they knew back to see it again. And that movie's special. It really is. But yeah, it's anyway, in the spirit of Everything Everywhere All at Once, let's cancel Star Wars. look, no, the real is Firestarter came out this week, and I literally don't know. I have no idea what I have and haven't discussed on. I've been recording for 10 minutes. I'm starting to lose track of what I've said on certain takes. So I don't even know if I've gone through this, but I'm going to go over it again. And I'll do it quickly just in case I've already gone. So Firestarter came out this weekend. I didn't even know that movie existed until about, 2 weeks ago or a week ago when I saw the trailer premiere before everything, everywhere all at once. So didn't know that movie existed. Don't care about it. Me and Brando were originally going to watch The Outfit. When I was ready to sit down and rent it. I don't know if I've said this already. I have no clue. We're not talking about The Outfit. How about that? So I just wanted to talk real quick about a couple of things real quickly, and then I'll get into retconning Star Wars. I have been watching Better Call Saul, and I just started season 5 a couple of days ago. I am loving it a lot. But what's interesting about Better Call Saul is that Better Call Saul came along, and the Breaking Bad hype and the fandom definitely caused me to watch the show at the time, but I don't think Better Call Saul started out strong enough, and maybe it didn't have to. Probably didn't have to. Maybe that was unfair of me to think that it should have, but it didn't start out as strong as I was hoping, and it didn't carry me along with it. Better Call Saul for a couple of years was a show that I've kind of had to restart, and pick back up after like so many years, and it just got away from me. I think the last time I rewatched it or started watching it prior to now, it was probably like 3 years ago. I'm not even sure if season 3 had come out yet. It was definitely before the pandemic when I started, and it just didn't carry me along. I always liked it, but everything else in pop culture was so much louder and maybe flashier, and depending on what podcast I was hosting at the time, I was probably worried about keeping up with all the new. What's fascinating about where we are now, when before I hit record, I got on to Slash Film and Collider and was just reading some headlines, saw a Top Gun Maverick review, just reading some headlines, things that were going on. And half the stuff that was written about, mostly in regards to television, half of it I wasn't familiar with. I couldn't even tell you what they are now, but I was reading a lot of stories about a lot of titles, about a lot of shows, and I just didn't know they existed. I think one of them had to do with, I think it said something like the Vampire Diaries franchise is finally dead after like 15 years or whatever the headline was. And it included the fact that there were 3 shows from that franchise, from the Vampire Diaries. And I just didn't know that was a thing. I thought Vampire Diaries was a show, but apparently it has 2 spinoffs, I guess. No clue. And I was talking to Jay last night, and he told me that he just stopped caring about following along with pop culture. He just doesn't do it anymore. He doesn't care about keeping up with it. He just watches when he wants to. I think he said he watches Atlanta. He watches what he wants to watch, and that's that. He's, I guess, turning on streaming services and what's ever being advertised to him, he's just making decisions in that moment. But he's not keeping up with news anymore. And it's amazing to me as someone who hosted a podcast with him, who was like maybe like more in touch with stuff than I was. And I was like super in touch with a lot of what was going on. But you know what? It was kind of freeing to not know what was happening. Because it just seems like in this age, the best stuff, more than ever, maybe this was always the case, but more than ever, the best stuff rises to the top. So a Severance, for example. Severance, after Better Call Saul, Severance is the next show that I'm watching. Because of how many people have brought it up to me. How many times I've read that title. A friend of mine told me that it was the best experience he's had in television since watching Lost, which means a lot to me. Jay didn't even know what Severance was. Yeah. And if you know Jay, it's amazing, but also freeing. It really was. It's no secret that like I've come to fall back in love with movies, and I haven't been paying as much attention to TV shows as much. I don't know, movies have just been doing something for me because it, that idea, that rule that the best rises to the top, that's kind of always been the case as far as like me podcasting about movies, because I've always known what I do and don't want to watch. Have I watched movies for the sole purpose of podcasting about them? For sure. But for the most part, I also just have always chosen, based on reviews, based on audience reactions, I've always chosen what not to watch. And Firestarter is a great example of that. The attitude and the conversation around Firestarter, there's nothing at all, not one thing that has convinced me to go and see that film. The only reason I could pull is that I want a podcast about it, and I'm not going to do it. I was talking about Better Call Saul, but that's part of it. You know, I guess it's about this greater conversation that I'm having with myself and I'm having with you, I guess. And not everybody shares this attitude, because there are people who just want to see everything, and I understand that. I do. But I've just kind of moved beyond that, and it's kind of freeing. It's kind of amazing. And I also love the idea in general that I just don't care about movie news anymore. Like, I was just rolling my eyes scrolling through Collider and Slash Film. I'm not going to lie, just because it reminded me of like when I put so much energy and effort into like caring about that kind of stuff. And I realized that like half the time or most of the time, it actually tainted my experience. Even though like movie news, it did excite me and I was genuinely into it. I was genuinely interested in it. But at the same time, it tainted my view and it tainted my opinions and my love of this whole thing. And it's why I probably spent so much time not podcasting. It's because I don't know, I just think it's silly. I just think it's silly a lot of the time. And I know how ridiculous it sounds because I'm talking about this in the podcast where Star Wars has only disappointed me as a fan. But yeah, there's some sort of I don't know what that is. Something contradictory about me talking about fandom and disappointing fandom, but also I'm gonna be petty enough to rewrite my top 10 list because Star Wars. But hey, you know, it also just goes back again. It's about views and opinions changing, and I've realized that I love movies, and I also love not talking or thinking about Star Wars anymore. I say that, but look, if Obi-Wan Kenobi comes out and it's awesome, I'll talk about Obi-Wan Kenobi, but also my opinions and my status update in terms of loving Star Wars has definitely changed over the years. 100%. So, but I'll dive more into that. But Better Call Saul, I'm all over the place. But Better Call Saul, look, it's been a great viewing experience. And right now, I can feel the end game. I'm early into season 5 still. Season 6 is airing live right now on television. I am trying to catch up because I would like to see the ending of Better Call Saul on television, reminiscent of my experience with Breaking Bad. So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm binging Better Call Saul to get to the ending. And of course it was released that Aaron Paul and Bryan Cranston are coming back. And I actually think Vince Gilligan and Peter Gould and whatever, this Breaking Bad franchise, I actually like and appreciate how they incorporate the past and the present and the future and old characters. And I think it's one of the greatest franchises ever. Breaking Bad, El Camino, Better Call Saul, whatever you want to call it, the Breaking Bad franchise, it's one of the greatest franchises ever, and we don't talk about it. We talk about how great Breaking Bad is, but it's a whole thing now. It's a whole family of content, and it's fantastic, and it's crazy. It's better than Star Wars. I think the people that say Better Call Saul might be better than Breaking Bad, they're out of their minds. Look, I love Better Call Saul, and it's great, and it's only gotten better since its first season. And it's going to change how I watch El Camino. It's going to change how I watch Breaking Bad from now on, and It's awesome. Again, I literally just said it's one of the greatest franchises of all time. People are out of their minds if they think Better Call Saul is better than Breaking Bad. At least right now. Out of their minds. Um, but it's still really, really, really good. And I'm enjoying it a lot. Feeling the end game. You know, I don't know what the conversation around the show is, other than that, like, I more than ever, I felt I'm about to lose characters that I've come to appreciate. Like, there's no way that Nacho survives Better Call Saul. There's going to be, like, a terrible ending with Saul and Kim. Like, all that kind of stuff, I don't know how it's going to happen, but I know it's going to happen, so that's the kind of stuff I'm thinking about now, and that's how I feel at the end game, even watching season 5, you know? But I'm really glad that I gave Better Call Saul another chance, another chance, because it's just been a great experience. And like I said, it's all the reflection that I've done on the retrospective, like looking back at like my fandom and my content creation and stuff like that. It's nice to, even though I'm talking about it right now, it's nice to watch the show and not feel the need to like recap it. It's kind of how I felt about Moon Knight. I said that I was going to recap Moon Knight after the first episode, and then I was just kind of like, there's not enough here for me to talk about. I mean, I could have made a video, but I don't think it would have been worthwhile. And that's why I just did a season review at the end. But anyway, Better Call Saul has been a fun experience, and I'm moving on to Severance, if anybody cares what TV shows I'm watching. So another thing that happened, and this is something that I've talked about for years on podcasts. I want to talk about comedy for a second. And this is kind of piggybacking off of the conversation I had with Brando about Crystalia the other day. I don't know what we were doing. We were maybe justifying our fandom for Crystalia, and we were talking about cancellations and forgiveness and separating art versus artists, and like I said, cancel culture already. We were talking about all that stuff. We were talking about comedy. This past week, and a lot of this I understand, it's going to involve maybe comedians that you aren't aware of, or it's going to involve a lot of backstory that you aren't aware of, and I understand that. But basically what happened, and I'll make this as succinct as possible. A couple of comedians in the LA comedy scene that run in the circles with Crystalia and Joe Rogan and Brian Callen, all those guys. So one of them's Bobby Lee, and the other is Brendan Schaub. Jay and I have talked a lot about these characters over the years, and I've kind of continued to follow them, but not really, because I realized my fandom for them was fleeting, I guess, because it was almost like I was too close to people that were making art for me, and not a lot of celebrities, not a lot of movie stars, not a lot of actors I can say that about. Because I didn't really realize until I started following these like LA comedy comedians, LA scene comedians, that I keep my fandom for celebrities typically at a respectful distance, you know, separate art from artists, but also don't really know a whole hell of a lot about the celebrities that I like and follow. Like Tom Cruise is a great example. I know a lot about Tom Cruise, and I've already kind of decided that like I do separate art from artists, and I just don't fill my mind, and I don't care with who he may or may not be as a person. I just appreciate that he entertains me, and I will pay him money if he's making the movies that he's making. And so that's just how I feel about it. But the thing about the LA scene for comedians is that not only would I listen to their art, like their stand-up and whether they take acting roles or whatever, but I'd also listen to them weekly on podcasts. And that's where I learn a whole hell of a lot more about them as people. And maybe at first I love them even more because I see how transparent they are as people. But also I find out how shitty they may or may not be as people. And maybe shitty's not even fair, because I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, and I'm not perfect, and maybe I've had issues in public, especially like on the schmo stuff, like just issues that were publicized that I probably prefer if they weren't, but are. And I'm a completely different person than who I was on those. Maybe not completely different, but I'm a different person than I was a couple of years ago, and it's a human thing. But the few years that I followed these comedians, there was always like, oh my God, this is the funniest person ever. I love the transparency. I wish every celebrity that I liked and appreciated had a podcast where I could just learn more about them. I realized I'm glad that that's not the case, because all that these guys have done over time is ruin my fandom for them, because they become too real and sometimes like really shitty and do like really shitty things. And it happened again with Brendan Schaub and Bobby Lee. And I understand it's not stuff that I have to care about, and I haven't cared about it in a couple of years, but it's also just the idea of like, I just have opinions on it, just like I have opinions on everything. So essentially the gist of it was Brendan Schaub, just to give you some backstory, he was an MMA fighter. He was not successful as an MMA fighter. Some might say he was bad, not good. I don't know enough about it, but that's just what I picked up on. So he quit and started podcasting and entering the LA comedy scene. And he is seen as a coattail rider. I don't know how to put it into terms. He's just been seen as like somebody who latches on to people and siphons off of their career. He's a leech, I guess. And that's what the view is from a fan's perspective. But he does have his own fans. But it's the idea of like, oh, he was on Joe Rogan's podcast once because he was in MMA. He used his clout and his friendship with Joe Rogan to become famous in the comedy scene. Even though, in my opinion, he is a bad comedian. Like maybe the worst comedian that I know of. And I'm aware of. But he's a podcaster, and he's a hustler, and he's a grinder, and I've always respected that about him. Is he ignorant and dim on a lot of things? Sure. But he's also just like running circles. Like he's friends with Chris D'Elia. He's on a podcast with Chris D'Elia. I like Chris D'Elia, even though we've had our fallouts with him too. But he was on Bobby Lee's podcast, and they talked about when Jay gave me the link to this video. I didn't know anything about it either, so I'm explaining it to people who probably don't know about it. But long story short, basically, Brendan Schaub has been bullied online because he's a bad comedian. And a lot of his personal laundry and personal baggage has been on display, whether it be on social media or Reddit or whatever, over the years, ever since he started podcasting. Because there are definitely a group of people that are like, hey, he just shouldn't be a comedian. And he gets ridiculed and harassed a lot online. But apparently, something happened where the Reddit thread that it doesn't belong to them like they own it, but the Reddit thread dedicated to his podcast, The Fighter and the Kid, who's basically used it as a platform to bully him over the years, there apparently have been issues with like posts about like pedophilia and posts about like somebody beating someone in a video. Like, I'm not exactly clear what happened, but basically some like questionable content was put on this Reddit thread. And Brendan, I guess, took it upon himself to like go after these people. So there were like investigations as to who all these bullies and harassers and these like questionable people were. And it got tied somehow back to the Tiger Belly podcast, which is Bobby Lee's podcast that belongs to another LA comedian. So basically what happened was Brendan found out, quote unquote, that the bullying and harassing that he's been getting on Reddit came from someone within another, like a friend of his, essentially. And as far as Bobby Lee and his wife, I believe, who also runs the podcast with them, they're just like, it's just not true. And anybody on the internet can say that they have a Gmail account that's called Tiger Belly, but it's just wrong. And I believe it. So that's what the podcast was about. Brendan sat down with Bobby Lee, and they basically hashed out all this drama. And Bobby Lee comes off as like super genuine, and it was like, I've always liked you, but also I'm a comedian, and why would I spend any time like tearing down a comedian on his own Reddit thread? Like, that's just not at all realistic and how it would happen. And I guess Brendan, off air, they were like shouting matches with each other, and they were like yelling at each other. And anyway, it's a whole bunch of drama that you probably aren't interested in. But it reminded me a lot of stuff that I've gone through in the podcast scene. You know, a lot of like drama and stuff that I've been a part of, whether it's Schmoes or Collider, but even like with my own personal co-hosts. Like, you know, Film Beef ended, it was due to a fallout, and not one that, you know, looking back on it, it was something that could have been prevented. But much like what I said about my setup, you know, it's about, you have to grow, you know? So basically being confronted with this thing, and being confronted with this drama, I had opinions on it, and it made me glad that I distanced myself from these celebrities and these people, but also at the same time I saw myself in it, and maybe that's why I rejected it in the first place. But it's kind of fascinating. And it might not be to you. I don't know how much you all relate to this, but it was just fascinating to listen to it, um, but also relate to it, and also reject it, but also because I feel guilty and because I felt like it held a mirror up to me. And yeah, because I told Jay, we were talking about it on the phone. I was just like, the LA comedy scene needs to be burned to the ground. And it reminded me of how me and Jay used to say that, like, the Hollywood LA like movie punditry space that we were a part of for so long, it just needs to go away, because those people were just like so toxic, and that space was like just so gross. Even stuff that like wasn't aired out on in public. Like, I remember just me and Jay had a show dedicated to Collider and Schmoes Know in that space. We talk about Screen Junkies, and we saw it from a distance. And I'm speaking for myself because Jay, but I was speaking from a distance, but I wanted to be a part of it. And that's why I was doing it. He didn't. So we were able to kind of look from across the country and just be like, these people are actually like really like, and when I say shitty, I mean like human, the way that I have been. They make a lot of mistakes, and they don't know how to handle things properly, and they are 100% in a bubble. But I also related to it, and I was also a part of it, and I also had that whole thing going on within my own friends group and creation group back here. And it was just I don't really know what the point of this is, but you know, everything gets better with time and space. And starting this podcast up has allowed me to look back, and like I said, you know, let the past die 100%. Like, I never want to revisit like what I went through with Afterschmo or Collider Afterthoughts or anything like that ever again. Even though those podcasts were incredible, I listened to a couple of episodes and they were incredible. I have no problem saying it. It was an amazing podcast that Collider and Schmozno had no idea how to handle or what to do with. No clue. But at the same time, I'm so happy to be where I'm at now. I'm happy to be human. I've made a lot of mistakes, but right now I feel like I have a healthy understanding of it. And like, even off air right now, like, I woke up this morning and the first thing that I wanted to do was reach out to somebody who I had a falling out with. And I literally just asked him, I was like, hey, do you just want to have a normal conversation? And we've been having a normal conversation, just catching up. I haven't talked to him in years. And the past, it's going to get brought up. You know, it's impossible to avoid, but I don't know. all this came from hating on Star Wars and drama with the LA comedy scene. I don't know. It's just anyway, I've gone on too long about this. Also, Better Call Saul. How did I get Better Call Saul into this? Enough of the preamble. Okay, if you're watching on YouTube, welcome to every movie ever. I did intro this idea on the Watch Diary podcast, so definitely check out Watch Diary if you haven't already, because this video is an excerpt from that podcast. But anyway, what we're doing today, a little bit of an intro here. What I'm doing today, I am retconning every top 10 list I've ever done that includes a Disney Star Wars movie and redoing my top 10 of that year. So, this particular video, I'm talking about the year 2015, which is the year that The Force Awakens debuted. Look, I've been podcasting for a long time. Star Wars The Force Awakens, my anticipation for it, my love for it at the time was heavily documented on a podcast that no longer exists called Film Beef and some other podcasts. But, you know, it was my most anticipated movie at one point of my life, and now I don't consider it worthy to be on a top 10 list. Look, I never thought I'd be on YouTube bashing Star Wars, because for years, all I did was reject those people who spoke so poorly about Disney Star Wars, because at one point, and I did at one point, think that Disney Star Wars was fantastic. But The Rise of Skywalker changed everything. Now, The Rise of Skywalker, obviously, just based on what I said, was not in a top 10 list that I ever did. There were only 3 years that I included a Disney Star Wars movie in my top 10 lists that were recorded on podcasts. So 2015, 2016, and 2017. 2015, obviously, The Force Awakens. But Rise of Skywalker changed my entire outlook on Star Wars in general. And that's why I wanted to sit down and talk about this. So, look, like I said, I never in a million years thought that I'd be on here bashing Star Wars, and I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be reasonable and diplomatic and just not be a sourpuss, but at the same time, look, we talked a lot about growth on the podcast. Times change, opinions change, views change, and look, there are still things that I appreciate about certain Star Wars movies, but Star Wars is a franchise. Its batting average is so poor now, and its standing with me, it's so low. I think there are so many franchises that have come out, even since Star Wars was created, that have eclipsed it in terms of quality and consistency, and it's just the reality of the situation. Things that we probably don't admit or want to talk about. But that's the thing about Rewatch Ryan and Watch Diary. And, you know, I'm going to say how I feel about these things, and a lot of it, you know, pushes up against what we're supposed to think about film and television. But now it's just, you know, Star Wars is not a great franchise. It has great movies, it has good movies, it has bad movies, but as a franchise, it's been eclipsed by several podcasts. And there are a series of movies that are just better than Star Wars. Harry Potter movies, better than Star Wars. Sorry, that's just where we are. Star Wars has existed too long, and it's just soured, and that's just how I feel about it, without sounding like a Last Jedi hater, because I actually respect and appreciate The Last Jedi. But is it worthy of a top 10 list of 2017? Find out on that video. So look, I'm going to pull this up here. So let's pull up my Letterboxd here. This is not where I want to be. Okay. So I'm going to pull up. This was my top 10 list of 2015. I had a podcast at the time called Film Beef. I did it with my friend Phil. This was my top 10 at the time. And this is fascinating for a lot of reasons. What I remember about doing this, and I did listen to the episode, but what I remember about doing this is that obviously this was the year of spy movies. This is the year that Spectre came out, right? But it didn't make this list. Yeah, it was the year that Spectre came out, I believe. Is that right? I guess it was. Anyway, spy movies were out, and they were huge. Mad Max Fury Road, my reaction to that is kind of hilarious looking back at it in retrospect. But what I thought going into the podcast was that my top 3 were actually Force Awakens, Creed, and Ex Machina. And I thought I had an asterisk beside all of that. Like, hey, these are actually just like all 3 the best movies of the year. I forgot that I actually put Room as number 3. And I didn't remember putting Force Awakens as the number one movie, but it's kind of what makes this retcon idea amazing. Because I came up with the idea to do this video before I remembered I had a list where a Star Wars movie, The Force Awakens, was my number one movie of all time. And that's fascinating to me. Because Star Wars The Force Awakens, just looking at it, has so much in common with Creed. And it's crazy that, maybe it's not crazy. I'm not going to call my younger self crazy a whole lot on this podcast, but Creed and Star Wars The Force Awakens were rebootquels. And one of them I just feel like is obviously of higher quality. And it's just interesting to look back at 2015 self and see that this is how I arrange things. And so look, this list, it maybe of the 3 lists that I'm doing in this series, it might be the one that changed the least, I think. But it also, in a weird way, has changed the most. Because I didn't put Rogue One as my number one of 16, and I didn't put Last Jedi as my number one of 17. So the fact that I'm changing it so much that I removed the number one from a list, it's actually pretty incredible. So what I ended up doing here, I believe, is I actually removed Star Wars The Force Awakens, and I'm going to switch over to my list here in a minute. But I removed The Force Awakens entirely. And I add a movie that is not featured here. I believe I add Sicario and Steve Jobs, which at the time I had not seen Steve Jobs or Sicario at the time that I made this list, because they were movies, just like every year, aren't released properly before the end of the year. You know, so they might have been in theaters, but I didn't get to them because of where I was in the country and probably couldn't get to them. I remember watching Sicario and Steve Jobs. I downloaded torrents, low quality torrents, and I watched them, I think, on a laptop that was plugged into an HDMI on my TV. That's where we were back then, guys. 2015. So not only had I not seen those movies yet, but I watched them in the most ridiculous way possible. But that's just how it was, you know? So a lot of blockbuster fare here because they were just easily the most accessible movies at the time. So I do update it with Steve Jobs and Sicario. So now let me pull up what I did here. And it might be better that I just pull this out so I can compare. That might be the best way, I think. No, wrong one. Okay. So let's just do this side by side, shall we? I don't know. Maybe I should have thought about this. All right. So looking at this, Steve Jobs climbs to the top. I'll just do it like this. Sorry. Steve Jobs, and I was surprised. Steve Jobs rose to the top. I've only grown to appreciate this movie even more over the years. It plays like music to me. The writing and the direction and Michael Fassbender, the whole thing, it plays like music. And I love that it's not a contemporary biopic. I love that actually there are scenes that play so well to the music, and there's arguments, and it's so entertaining. And also this was a window into Steve Jobs that I just I wasn't privy to. I didn't know a whole lot about him in general, but I definitely didn't know about his relationship with Steve Wozniak. And like, I'm not even relying on this movie being entirely accurate. I've kind of like come to terms with the fact that it probably isn't, but I've rewatched this movie multiple times over the years, and I think it was super high up. I did a top 100 of the 2010s list on a previous show, and it just rose to the top too. I've grown to really appreciate this movie. So the other thing that I did was The Gift just went just number 3. Because if there was a movie that I was going to recommend to people out of this year, because I felt like they either time had forgotten it or because they never saw it in the first place, The Gift was the most unsuspecting movie of 2015. And it's one of my favorite. I'm so glad that I included it in general on my top 10. I remember loving the movie quite a bit, but I think back fondly over it. And I've shown it to a lot of people, and I've watched it a couple of times, and they don't make movies like this anymore. Like a lot of the movies that come out that are like this are like obviously straight to DVD and the quality's just poor, but I thought The Gift was so well done and so thoughtfully directed and acted. Joel Edgerton crushes it. It's the first like big dramatic shift that I remember from Jason Bateman. Rebecca Hall is great in it. She was great in The Night House, which was one of my favorite movies of last year. So I feel like even though The Gift might not be remembered as a movie, a lot of what we appreciate now, like look, Ozark just ended. Jason Bateman has definitely become something else entirely to a new audience, and I think a lot of that comes from this movie and what they were able to do with it. So if we got director and dramatic actor Jason Bateman because of this movie, I think that's a positive thing. Um, Mad Max Fury Road rose up a little bit for me. Yeah, it was my number 6. I remember coming out of the theater and even going into it, unsure about how I felt. I didn't have a pre-existing fandom for this franchise. And when I came out of it, it was, we were talking about how muffled the dialogue was during our theater experience. And, you know, I've thought a lot about this movie and I've rewatched this movie multiple times. It's a movie that if I want to have a movie on, it's one of my go-to. I just put it on and I, sit down and let it play and I watch certain scenes. And, I don't do that with a lot of movies. I certainly don't do it with Room, for example. And so the lasting legacy of Mad Max Fury Road and the fact that we still haven't but are getting a Furiosa movie, I'm excited. And the stock in Mad Max Fury Road has only risen. Ex Machina, I love that movie. I don't think I've gone back to rewatch it once since 2015. So I have fond memories and I really appreciate it. And Oscar Isaac is incredible, and it really comes from Ex Machina. A lot of, I think, what the dialogue that we have about Oscar Isaac, a lot of it comes from Ex Machina. So I left it at number 5, but it hasn't had the rewatchability as much as like Rogue Nation, for example. Rogue Nation, another great action film, dope coming of age movies. Sicario is a movie that I was also, like Steve Jobs, I was surprised that I included on this top 10. Sicario is not one of my favorites. I don't love it as much as most people do in terms of Denis Villeneuve movies, but I have rewatched it multiple times. And The Martian, crowd-pleasing movie, I like it a lot. And Room fell hard, but I couldn't take it completely off of my list because I remember the emotional response that I had to this movie. And Jacob Tremblay and Brie Larson, they're still huge. Like Jacob Tremblay busted onto the scene because of this movie, and he's consistently been in movies ever since. And Brie Larson is Captain Marvel. Even say what you will about that movie, but Brie Larson's still bigger than ever too. So a lot of these movies have lasting legacies, and a lot of them I probably should, like Sicario, I probably should have included it in the first place, but given my circumstance at the time, I just hadn't yet. So I took Kingsman off. I love Kingsman, but I just don't think it's top 10 worthy anymore. Like there was a better spy movie in Rogue Nation, and if I was gonna have one, it would be that. And that franchise. Also, the Mission Impossible franchise has just like stayed super relevant, and Kingsman hasn't, even though it is the first movie. So yeah, I took Force Awakens and Kingsman off, and I added Steve Jobs and Sicario. And another thing that I noticed, because I definitely was like looking on IMDb and on Wikipedia to see if there was a 2015 movie that I hadn't watched in 2015, but I had watched since then that I could add to the list. And to my knowledge, I haven't watched any 2015 movies that I hadn't seen before. Am I getting that point across? Since I made this list, I have not seen, in the last 7 years, I haven't seen any 2015 movies that I hadn't seen since 2015, if that makes sense. So yeah, I haven't gone back and revisited any movies that are like 2 years ago, I didn't watch a 2015 movie for the first time, so it wasn't included. I didn't do that until 2016. But anyway, that's my new list. Creed, I think it goes without saying. The movie's amazing. Steve Jobs, The Gift, Mad Max Fury Road, Ex Machina, Rogue Nation, Dope, Sicario, The Martian, and The Room. That is my new top 10 movie list of 2015 without Star Wars. So guys, if you want to go to my Letterboxd, letterboxd.com/rewatchryan, I have my top 10 of 2015 list, circa 2015, that included what I talked about on the Film Beef podcast at the time, but I also had the top 10 of 2015 without Star Wars. So without further ado, that's the end of this video. Go check out the top 10 movies of 2016 on another video. If you're watching this on YouTube, this is every movie ever. I already sort of introed this on the Watch Diary podcast, so make sure you listen to that wherever podcasts are sold. Just find Watch Diary. So here's what we're doing. In 2016, I did a top 10 list that included Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. Now, I actually like Rogue One a lot. When I talk about my distrust and my disdain and my falling out of love with Star Wars, it has more so to do with the sequel trilogy and like Book of Boba Fett, which I think is like awful, genuinely awful. But there's not as much disdain as the years have gone on for Rogue One. I actually think it's pretty damn good, but we're not here to talk about Rogue One. We're here to talk about the fact that I've just simply fallen out of love with Star Wars over the years. And I've made top 10 lists that include Star Wars movies, including this one. So I'm going to go over the top 10 movies list that I publicly talk about on Sight and Sound. That actually is on this YouTube channel. If you go back, top 10 of 2016, it's an episode of Sight and Sound movies. I'm going to go over that top 10 list, and then I'm going to remove Rogue One, and I'm going to give you the new top 10 list of 2016 on this little excerpt here. So, if you're listening on Watch Diary, please forgive me because I've already I did a little intro for the 2015 video, but it's all good. You get me and you love me. So, without further ado, on the 2016 podcast that I did, this was my top 10 right here. And let me switch over. This is my top 10. Number 1, Arrival. 2, Sing Street, Hacksaw Ridge, Green Room, La La Land, Don't Breathe, Civil War, 10 Cloverfield Lane, Rogue One, and Hell or High Water. So here's what I got right. When it comes to massive blockbusters, Civil War is better than Rogue One. And that hasn't changed. That's how I feel about it. This is also a big year for like musically themed movies, which I can be passionate about. I don't like musicals, but I like musically themed movies. So La La Land, Green Room, and Sing Street. Also, big year for horror for me. 10 Cloverfield Lane, Don't Breathe, Green Room. Big year for horror and musically themed movies. And also 2 of the biggest movies of all time, Civil War, Rogue One. So I made a lot of surprising decisions here. And let's start with the fact that on my new top 10 list, I don't feature Sing Street at all. I love Sing Street a lot, but when I look back at what 2016 means to me, I haven't rewatched Sing Street since the first initial time that I watched it. And I actually have a deep connection to that movie, but literally, simply put, 10 other movies just rose to the top. They've had a more lasting sustainability over the years. I mean, we're 6 years removed, 5 years removed, depending on whatever you want to say. So Sing Street was actually taken off of my list entirely, I believe. And I think that, let's see, did I take off? I think I removed 10 Cloverfield Lane as well, and Hell or High Water. I think so. We'll get there. So on the 2015 episode that I did, at the end, I talked about how right now in 2022, I'd realized that I hadn't seen any 2015 movies for the first time since then. So I didn't add any new movies to the list that I rewatched since then, all those years ago. That's changed with this list. So the one movie that I watched after 2016 that was released in 2016 was Edge of 17. I love that movie. I rewatched that movie a lot, actually. I think it's so entertaining, so enjoyable. I love coming of age movies. And Edge of 17, in terms of loving coming of age movies, Edge of 17 just kind of eclipsed Sing Street. Now, they're both very good, but Edge of 17 has just meant a little bit more to me. Plus, like the Haley Steinfeld of it all, like she's just only gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, and I just feel like in general it's greater and more lasting. Sing Street's still really good though. So Edge of 17, that's the first movie that I've sort of brought into this list that I wasn't able to do the first time around. Another movie that I had seen in 2016, I didn't put it on this list, but I am now retroactively, is The Witch. And I talked about The Witch recently on the Every Movie Ever for Robert Eggers. So let's switch over to my new top 10 list. And by the way, you can see all of this on my Letterboxd. This is the list of 2016, circa 2016. And this is my new top 10 list for 2016 without Star Wars. It looks a little bit different. So let's go over what's going on here. So Hacksaw Ridge fell hard, but it didn't leave. The reason for that, I have not rewatched Hacksaw Ridge. It's very similar to what I said about Room on the other episode, on the 2015 episode. Hacksaw Ridge impacted me emotionally. I left the theater and just cried in my car. I went home and my mom and my aunt were at my house talking, and I just like literally cried in their arms because Hacksaw Ridge, and I talked about this on the podcast too back then. Hacksaw Ridge affected me because I saw somebody. If you remember, the story is this guy is a conscientious, I can't remember what the term is. He wanted to be a part of, he felt a responsibility to become active in the World War II, I believe, but he refused to use guns. And I was so wrecked by that idea. And because the movie's, it's manipulative and it just, it's rousing and it's tear jerking. The performances are great. Andrew Garfield is amazing. But the idea that what this person not only thought to do, but did do is way more than I've ever even thought to do. I've never in my life thought to join the army. He joined the army and did it without ever using a gun. And it made me feel so badly about myself. And I was a wreck. I was a big baby when I left the theater. And also, Mel Gibson, say what you will about him, but he's a hell of a director. And this was just it's a really good movie. But I haven't revisited it. And I said that about Room. And Room dropped a lot on my 2015 list too. So Hacksaw Ridge is like that. I'm sorry, I misspoke. 10 Cloverfield Lane. I'm going to switch Don't Breathe live right here. Don't Breathe was an amazing theater experience, and I don't love a lot of horror movies, and this was horror, but it also just had a thriller concept. That's the stuff that's scariest to me. It's another reason why Green Room is on here too. Just intense situations scare me. Not slashers, not killers chasing horny teenagers. That stuff not ghosts. That stuff doesn't scare me. Intense situations scare me. And Don't Breathe as a concept is an intense situation. I think the filmmaking's great. It was a fun theater experience and I loved it. 10 Cloverfield Lane, it was the better version of Split. Split came out this year, right? Or is it the next year? Split came out in 2017, but they're so similar. I feel like Split maybe has a longer lasting legacy because of Glass and I don't know, Shyamalan, but 10 Cloverfield Lane is the better version of it. And Mary Elizabeth Winstead, she hasn't like really, really popped the way that I expected and want her to, but she's awesome in it. Just the whole thing. And I love Cloverfield. Cloverfield has meant a lot to me. Especially this movie probably has meant the most to me. I think it's better than the original. And there's just something magical about the word Cloverfield and what it's meant to cinema, the surprises and the conventions that it pushes up against. Cloverfield Paradox is terrible, but at least there was like something special about it being released the way that it was. And 10 Cloverfield Lane, I think, is just the best of the three, and it's well directed, and it's just it's the better version of a few movies that have come out since then, and I just don't think it gets enough credit anymore. Hell or High Water was number 10, and it just kind of rose to the top. My appreciation, the climax, the acting. I've rewatched it a couple of times. Sheridan Universe, the stock has only risen for the most part. I watched some Yellowstone this year, and Yellowstone, it varies in quality, but it kind of just made this movie look better. And, if I'm in the Yellowstone mood, I might as well just watch this movie. So, The Witch. Look, The Witch, intense situations. That's what I'm into. And just the filmmaking, and my appreciation for this movie. Anya Taylor-Joy stock has only risen since then. The Witch is something I've grown to appreciate more because it came out and I loved it. I saw it in theaters. And I just wish more movies were like this, simply put. The absolute transportation that this movie, I mean, it took me to another world. And, when I watch a Marvel movie, I'm going to the Marvel world, but I'm so familiar with it. And, other movies kind of take me there. But The Witch is just something else. And I can't believe that it was allowed to get made, honestly. And I feel like more people over time have grown to appreciate it because Robert Eggers. But The Witch is, I mean, I think it's better than The Lighthouse. I still think it's better than The Northman. But yeah, we've had a lot of Robert Eggers talk in the past couple of months, and The Witch, it's just incredible. Edge of 17, I've rewatched this movie more than La La Land, more than Arrival, but it's not better than those. And I think about La La Land a lot, and I think about Arrival a lot. Arrival, I think, is still my second favorite Denis Villeneuve movie. But I guess the other big thing here that I want to talk about is that Captain America Civil War, it was crazy to me that I had it below Don't Breathe. Civil War is probably easily my most rewatched movie on this entire list. It has a couple of faults, but it's one of the greatest Marvel movies after all these years. It's 6 years removed from it, and it's just incredible. This was the template for the amazing Infinity War. And I just think so much of it works, and so much goodness, Black Panther, Spider-Man, so much goodness has come from it. It's maybe the best performance from Chris Evans as Cap. It's maybe the best performance as Iron Man from Robert Downey Jr. And it's just an incredible comic book movie. It really is. Green Room, I just rewatched not too long ago, and I still love it. The reason why Sing Street and Green Room I have a connection to is because I grew up, more so in Green Room, I grew up in a familiar scene that the band in this movie comes from. Not that I ever, played a show for neo-Nazis, but the hardcore punk scene, and, as the movie opens, it reminded me very much of my experience. And so I've connected tissues with that. But I also just think it's one of the best horror movies. Based on what I look for in horror, it's just one of the best movies. And it's another movie like The Gift. It's the movie that I want to recommend to people the most. I had a movie night with a couple of friends the other day, and they told me they wanted to watch a horror movie, and this is the first place my mind went, was Green Room. And I think they really appreciated it. La La Land, my conversation around La La Land on the podcast that I listened to was the most interesting, I think, because I don't like musicals. I don't think this is a musical. I actually don't even really think the music in the movie is the greatest aspect of it. Like, I know that it won some awards, but I think there's like one great song in it, and that's about it. But it's everything else. It's the chemistry and the charisma that Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone have. I think the acting is incredible. I love the writing and the story, and I just think it's wonderful. I really, really do. And it kind of just doesn't matter that the music isn't that great to me, because I feel like I'm maybe just kind of being a snob about the music that's in the movie, but everything else, I mean, I think about this movie all the time, and the ending, the climax, it's incredible. So I have no problem saying, I think a couple of movies that are interesting that I left off, Deadpool, I like Deadpool a lot, but I'm kind of also a little bit over Deadpool based on my reaction to Deadpool 2 and, my excitement for Deadpool 3. Doctor Strange, I like Doctor Strange quite a bit, and I think it's only grown in stock since I've watched it, and I've rewatched it more than most of these movies, but it's because it's a Marvel movie. It's not because I think it's necessarily better, but Doctor Strange, I just wrote a list of all the movies that I, primarily take with me in my everyday life from 2016. And Doctor Strange was one I just had to mention, but it's not going to be my top 10, and it never was. So yeah, Edge of 17 out of nowhere. Since I've rewatched it, I probably watched it in like 2017, 2018. I've seen it several times. So just that was the movie that I think is better than Rogue One. How about that? And yeah, where Civil War was, I'm kind of shocked. I think there was like some hesitation that I just shouldn't put a comic book movie too high up. But Infinity War was what my second favorite movie of 20, was that 18? So there was no shame in that. So I don't know why I felt shame here, but I mean, just you know, I think that's also why I put Rogue One initially at number 9. If we want to look at that real quick, right? So yeah, that's what surprised me. It surprised me that Don't Breathe was above the movies that it was. Um, I'm a little bit shocked I haven't rewatched Sing Street since this year. Um, but yeah, there was a lot of big changes on that one too. So anyway, that's my top 10. And again, you can go to letterboxd.com and look at these my top 10 movies of 2016, circa 2016, and also the new one without Star Wars. So there's that. Rogue One's out, Edge of 17 and The Witch are in, and I do think that they are better movies. So anyway, definitely check that out. And join me on the next video or in a few seconds when I talk about the top 10 list of 2017 that does not include The Last Jedi, which may or may not be still my favorite movie from the Disney Star Wars era. All right, if you're watching on YouTube, welcome to Every Movie Ever. Here's what we're doing here. I am retconning every top 10 list I've ever made that included a Disney Star Wars. So I've already done 2015, 2016, and now I'm here to do 2017. Yes, on my podcast back in 2017, I included Star Wars The Last Jedi. It was my number 7 on my top 10 list, which is interesting because if you watch my 2015 video, Star Wars The Force Awakens was my number 1 movie of 2015. But in 2017, Star Wars The Last Jedi was my number 7, but I've always thought The Last Jedi was better than The Force Awakens. So that alone was enough for me to warrant an updated list. You know, opinions change, views change over time. And has Disney and Star Wars really disappointed me over the years? Absolutely. But at this point in time, I love The Last Jedi, and I still have a huge appreciation for it as a blockbuster. But and I know that's controversial, but I don't think it's worthy of top 10 anymore because Star Wars has just fallen so low on my list of priorities in terms of fandom, in terms of movie going. So I am redoing my top 10 list of 2017. And I think of the 3 lists, this one varies the most. I made the most wild changes here. I don't know where I was in 2017. I don't really recognize myself here. There's a couple of things that stay exactly the same, but the rest are just all over the place. So without further ado, let me show you on the Sight and Sound podcast, which the video is actually on this YouTube channel. So if you look up top 10 in 2017, Sight and Sound or Rewatch Ryan, it'll be there and you can listen to the podcast. But here is my, at the time, top 10 list for 2017. Okay, so do we have this up? Perfect. Number 1, Logan. Number 2, Wind River. Wonder Woman, Get Out. War for the Planet of the Apes is number 5. 6 is It. Last Jedi 7. Blade Runner 2049. Blade Runner 2049 is 8. Big Sick is 9. And Disaster Artist is 10. So, you know that on my updated list, I do remove The Last Jedi. But I asked a couple of other movies that just haven't had a lasting legacy with me. You know, we're 5 years removed at the time that I'm recording this. The Disaster Artist, I have not revisited once. I think about it sometimes. The Big Sick, I really appreciate it. I think it's better than The Disaster Artist still, based on this list. Have not revisited, have not rewatched it. Haven't really thought about it, but I actually think it's actually it's less in the conversation of great movies than The Disaster Artist is. I think The Big Sick is somewhat more forgotten as a movie, even though it's better and more appreciated. It wasn't as flashy as Disaster Artist. But those two just haven't had that lasting of a legacy. So I looked on Wikipedia in 2017 in film, and I before I redid this list, I looked at movies that I had watched since I made this list that came out from 2017. And there's one movie, I believe, that I watched maybe a couple of years ago. That was a 2017 release that never would have made it on this list because I hadn't seen it yet. And it was Good Time. And one thing which is fantastic because Robert Pattinson is only, the Batman, come on. But the thing about these lists, because I did the same thing for 2015. Since 2015, I hadn't seen any new 2015 movies that I could apply to the list. 2016, the only movie that I hadn't seen in 2016 that I added to the list because I'd watched it since then was Edge of 17. I can't think of a great way to explain what I'm saying. A movie that I didn't watch the year that it came out that I watched retroactively. So for 2017, it was Good Time. I watched it, I think, for the first time when I lived in Arizona. So it would have been like 2019, 2020, a couple of years ago that I watched it for the first time. So now that I'm redoing my list, I can include Good Time in my top 10 movies of 2017. So without further ado, just looking at this real quick, I think I'm most surprised that I'm not surprised that Wonder Woman is as high as it is because I remember how I felt and I know how I feel about that movie now. But what I'm most surprised at is what did and didn't beat Thor Ragnarok and Spider-Man Homecoming. Because when you think about it, 2017, one of the greatest years in comic book movie history. Logan, Wonder Woman, Thor Ragnarok, Spider-Man Homecoming. Guardians 2 came out, but I don't like that movie. An amazing year. I could have had all four of these movies on a top 10 and felt pretty comfortable with it. And I did do a ranking somewhere of those movies, but yeah, Ragnarok and or Homecoming didn't make my list initially. And that's pretty amazing, especially because I've only grown more fond of both movies since then. So that catches my eye. War for the Planet of the Apes. When I look at all three of these lists, 2017, 16, 15, it's one of the greatest blockbusters still. I mean, Matt Reeves, this movie I've only grown more fond of this movie. But I did do a ranking of it recently on the quarterly report, and I still think Dawn is better. But, I mean, man, those movies are incredible. Get Out, my stock in Get Out has fallen a little bit because I've rewatched it, and it's just not as, big and impactful as I remember. It and Blade Runner 2049 climbs super high. All right, so without further ado, let's look at the new top 10 list from me of 2017, and let's see all the changes that I made without Star Wars The Last Jedi, shall we? Boom. Here's what's crazy. I had to throw the comic book movies in there. I had to, because look, Spider-Man Homecoming and Ragnarok simply have a greater impact on me, but also in pop culture than The Big Sick and The Disaster Artist. Let's just face it, okay? And when I looked at the honorable mentions that I had, Baby Driver was an honorable mention. I actually debated on including it, but the stock for that movie has fallen for me. Ansel Elgort, I'm done with him. I just don't like him. I've given him plenty of chances. I just don't like him. And that's what keeps it out of the top 10. There's a couple of them, like Logan Lucky, I like a lot. Not strong enough for a top 10. American Made, not strong enough for a top 10. Split, same. John Wick 2. You know what? John Wick 2 is actually a movie that, yeah. John Wick 2, I guess, is a movie that I've, Good Time, didn't watch in 17. But I saw it later. But it still wasn't good enough for top 10. So that's an exception to what I said. So yeah, Spider-Man Homecoming, Ragnarok, and Good Time all replace Last Jedi, Big Sick, and Disaster Artist. And the fact that Good Time went straight to number 2, man, that movie meant a lot to me. I love that movie. I think it's fantastic. And the fact that it climbed so high that I think it's the second best movie of that year, amazing. Wind River, I haven't rewatched it, but I just remember thinking it was incredible. And I think it's my favorite, personally, of the Taylor Sheridan verse. Let's see, it's Wind River, it's Hell or High Water, and Sicario, right? Am I missing one? I think Wind River is personally my favorite, and I find it to be the most emotional, hands down. And plus, I went into it loving Jeremy Renner, but I've only loved fallen in love with Elizabeth Olsen more since this movie came out. So I'm actually really excited. I might rewatch it again soon. It's a movie that I've recommended to people. That's what's crazy about the number 3, I think, of all of these lists, is that it's a number 3 because it's a movie that I recommend to people when I want to give them a solid, good movie to watch. The way that I can't recommend Blade Runner 2049 to just anybody. And I don't, and I won't. But Blade Runner 2049 is a movie that I came out feeling indifferent, and I went into it not being a fan of the franchise in general. But as time has gone on, and we talk more and more about Denis Villeneuve, this is a movie sort of like how I felt about Fury Road. It's a movie that I didn't really know if I loved or not. I've only thought more and more about it. And I've just put it on the television when I wanted to put something on. It has a lot in common with Fury Road in that way. And I love it. And I think it's incredible. And I think it's a masterpiece. And it's a franchise that I'm not even as passionate about the Blade Runner franchise as I am Star Wars. But the fact that this movie, I mean, what an amazing film. I mean, it just looks incredible. Ana de Armas. Still one of the best horror movies that I've ever seen. The sequel is terrible. I watched it, Chapter 2, for the first time a few months ago. It's bad, but this one is still really good. And it's got the coming of age aspect to it, and it's fantastic. Get Out fell a little bit, but it's still one of the best movies that's come out in my lifetime, honestly. War for the Planet of the Apes. I think it's the most mature looking blockbuster, and I think it's done more for the evolution of film. I mean, we're about to get Avatar 2, and basically where we've gone with motion capture and Andy Serkis and what he's been able to do with Weta and that technology. I mean, I just think this movie's so pivotal, and it still holds up so well, and it's so emotional. And the fact that I fall in love with this living ape, and it still continues to be in the conversation of greatness, it's just wonderful. And I think it's the better blockbuster above Ragnarok, Wonder Woman, and Homecoming. I think that Homecoming is actually... I'm going to switch Homecoming and Wonder Woman right here. And I talked a lot about... I ranked the entire MCU on another episode of Every Movie Ever, so it's not surprising to you if you've seen that Ragnarok is above Homecoming. But Wonder Woman, I think, fell because the overall stock in the DCEU, as they continue to put more and more movies out, they tell us that this movie matters the least. Now, it's obviously, in my opinion, the best DCEU movie, hands down. And when I say DCEU, I'm not including Joker, and I'm not including the Batman. But if we're talking about the movies that came from the Snack Snyderverse, Wonder Woman is easily the best. The third act, I forgive more than most people, but it is still the weakest part, and it has the weakest villain of any movie. But the amount of adoration that I have for Steve Trevor and Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman, I mean, I fell in love with this movie. I fell in love with her. I fell in love with Wonder Woman, and like Captain America in my older age, she's actually a hero that I strive to be like. And I think the action scenes are actually really well done, and I think they still hold up, and they look really, really good. And so there's so much greatness in this movie, with a couple of short-sighted moments. But other than that, I have no problem. It's weird remaking these lists, though, because retroactively, I feel like I've grown so much as a person, and looking back at all these lists, I thought it was possible that all of these wildly changed. Because, Baby Driver, for example, is a movie that I've rewatched more than Wind River. But because it's empty calories, and I think I've rewatched it more because I went into it knowing that I was rewatching it to give it another chance. In some movies, I don't need to give another chance because I just don't think that low of them in the first place, like Wind River. So yeah, there's a couple of movies that I could have put on here. But honestly, the 3 lists that I made, they could have looked wildly different. They don't look as different as I thought. There's some rearranging of the order, but I really only take 2 movies out. And one of them is a Star Wars movie, and that's the entire point of this video series. It says take out Star Wars. So I take out maybe one or two other movies in all of my lists. It could have been worse. There could have been a much greater hacking going on, but yeah, I feel pretty solid about these lists because all of these movies are still in great standing with me, and I still talk about them and think about them all the time. And yeah, what a fun little experiment. And without the whole like, hey, retconning Star Wars, I would love to just keep going back and revisiting. But that's the thing, is that I've already covered like half of my podcasting era, reduxing, because I've only had like documented top 10 lists starting in 2014 up until now. So I've already done like half of the top 10 lists that I've done publicly, but it's still a fun little exercise to do. So, but anyway, that concludes it. Yes, I retconned every top 10 list I ever made with a Star Wars movie and redid it to exclude the Star Wars movie. So there's that. Guys, follow me on Twitter and Instagram. This is also the end of the Watch Diary podcast if you're listening. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at RewatchRyan. You can also go to my Letterboxd, letterboxd.com/rewatchryan, where all of these lists are available. I have the top 10 of 2017 circa 2017, and I have top 10 of 2017 without Star Wars. So guys, thank you so much for joining me on this whole thing. And again, if you're listening on the podcast, please check out the YouTube channel where all of these videos live and breathe. I love you. I'll see you on the next one.